In the year 1692, nestled in the heart of colonial Massachusetts, a small Puritan village called Salem found itself caught in a storm of fear, suspicion, and unrelenting hysteria. Life in Salem was usually quiet and orderly, its people governed by a strict religious code that left little room for deviation or dissent. But that year, something in the air shifted, something intangible yet profoundly unsettling. It all began, as many strange tales do, with a whisper. It was in the dead of winter, when the fields lay barren beneath heavy blankets of snow, that Reverend Samuel Parris began to notice something odd about his young daughter Betty and his niece Abigail. The girls had always been dutiful and obedient, but now they screamed at unseen spirits, twisted their bodies into impossible contortions, and convulsed with an intensity that frightened even the most hardened members of the community. Doctors were summoned, but they found no physical cause for the girls' affliction. One physician finally offered a diagnosis: the evil hand of witchcraft. In a village so steeped in religious conviction, such an explanation was both terrifying and oddly satisfying. It provided a reason, an enemy, a scapegoat. And from that moment, the slow unraveling of Salem's sanity began. Soon, other girls in the village began to exhibit similar symptoms. They named names, accusing townsfolk of consorting with the devil, of casting spells, of flying through the night. At first, it seemed absurd, but the accusations did not stop. They multiplied. They expanded to include the elderly, the lonely, the outspoken, anyone who stood out or had once caused offense. The first to be accused was Tituba, Reverend Parris's enslaved servant from the West Indies. Her foreign ways and strange tales had long made the townspeople wary. Under pressure and fear for her life, Tituba confessed. She spoke of black dogs, red cats, and witches' sabbaths in the forest. She named others. Her confession opened the floodgates. Sarah Good, a beggar woman known for her mutterings, and Sarah Osborne, who had not attended church in years, were next. As they were arrested, murmurs of fear rippled through the village. The community turned in on itself, suspicion rooting in every conversation, every glance. Families who once shared pews and crops now watched one another with narrowed eyes. The village magistrates, led by Jonathan Corwin and John Hathorne, began preliminary hearings in the Salem Meeting House. These hearings were frenzied affairs, with the accused often shouted down by the afflicted girls, who claimed to see demons or feel invisible pricks of pain. The magistrates accepted these fits as evidence, and the accused had little hope of defending themselves. Spectral evidence, testimony that the spirit or shape of the accused had appeared to the witness in a dream or vision, was admissible in court. By May, Governor William Phips had arrived with a new charter and appointed a special court, the Court of Oyez and Termine. Its purpose was to hear and determine cases of witchcraft. Presiding over it was Chief Justice William Stoughton, a man deeply committed to rooting out the evil he believed had taken hold of New England. One of the first to be tried was Bridget Bishop, a tavern owner with a sharp tongue and a history of trouble. The court saw her as the embodiment of a witch, independent, irreverent, and unbeholden to Puritan norms. She was convicted swiftly and hanged on Gallows Hill on June 10, 1692. Her execution sent a chilling message. The hunt had begun in earnest. More arrests followed. Martha Corey, respected in the community, voiced skepticism about the trials and was promptly accused herself. Her husband, Giles Corey, tried to defend her and was also indicted. As the summer wore on, the list of accused grew longer. Rebecca Nurse, a pious older woman beloved by many. George Burroughs, a former minister of Salem, and even young children. The trials were a grotesque theater of fear. Witnesses wept, shouted, collapsed in fits. The afflicted girls, led by Abigail Williams and Ann Putnam Jr., wailed that they saw spirits climbing the walls or clawing at their skin. The judges, many of whom were respected figures, accepted these visions as evidence. To them, the devil's work was real, and the fate of the colony rested on purging it. One of the most harrowing stories was that of Rebecca Nurse. Her case shook Salem to its core. An elderly and deeply devout woman, she was initially found not guilty by the jury. But the public outcry was so intense that the judges asked the jury to reconsider. They did and changed their verdict. Rebecca was hanged on July 19th alongside 4 others. As the executions mounted, 15 in total by hanging, and one, Giles Corey, pressed to death under heavy stones, unease began to seep into the edges of the community. Doubts surfaced, even among those who had once clamored for justice. When Giles Corey refused to plead guilty or not guilty, the court employed peine forte et dure, a torturous form of punishment to force a plea. For 2 days, heavy stones were placed upon his chest as he lay in the mud. His only words were more weight. His death marked a turning point. The trials reached their fever pitch in the early autumn. Accusations now extended to people in other towns, to the wealthy, to the well-connected. Suddenly, the frenzy threatened to consume not just the fringes, but the very heart of colonial society. It was at this moment that skepticism finally found a voice. The wife of Governor Phipps was named as a possible witch. Whether out of personal fear or dawning realization, Phipps acted swiftly. He dissolved the court of Oyer and Terminer in October 1692 and established a new court that disregarded spectral evidence. Without that keystone, the accusations lost much of their force. One by one, the jailed were released. Some had spent months in chains. Many had lost everything: family, property, reputation. But at least they were alive. Others were not so fortunate. Their names were etched into the memory of the town like scars. In January of the following year, the Massachusetts General Court declared a day of fasting and soul-searching. Ministers lamented the tragic error. In time, compensation was offered to the families of those executed. But the damage was done. The shadow of the trials would linger for generations. And yet, in those dark months of 1692, Salem had been gripped by something older than the colony itself. Fear of the unknown, fear of the outsider, fear of the self. It was not witches that haunted Salem, it was its own people. Their doubts, their envies, their unspoken grievances. In the end, it was not a force from beyond that undid them, but the very fabric of their community, torn apart by fear. Still, the village slept again eventually. The snow returned. The fields were plowed. Life, as it always does, went on, but not without a cost. And the question that would echo through history was not what spell had been cast on Salem, but what spell Salem had cast on itself. In the quiet that followed the dissolution of the court of Oyer and Terminer, Salem village stood hollowed, as if a storm had passed and taken more than trees and homes in its path. The autumn leaves fell, untouched by gallows or grief, but the people who walked beneath them were not the same. The village square, once a place of sermons and shared bread, had become a space of silence, where eyes avoided each other and voices held back their truths. But justice, even when mishandled, leaves its mark. In early 1693, Governor Phipps moved to establish the Superior Court of Judicature, which would handle all future witchcraft cases. Importantly, this court no longer permitted spectral evidence, the dreams, visions, and intangible hauntings that had carried so much weight in the previous proceedings. When the trials resumed in January, the tone was different. Fewer accusations came forward. The court, more cautious, dismissed case after case for lack of solid proof. Some of those who had been imprisoned for months were released, often broken in body and spirit. Their stories spread slowly, spoken in hushed tones over hearths, in the backs of meeting houses or along forest paths. One such tale belonged to Sarah Cloyce, the sister of the executed Rebecca Nurse. Sarah had been imprisoned but not tried. She returned home quietly and carried with her the pain of injustice, but she did not stay silent. Alongside her other sister, Mary Easty, who had also been hanged, Sarah's family became one of the first to publicly petition for a reversal of the verdicts. In a society that valued conformity and silence, it was a radical act. By the spring of 1693, over 50 accused individuals remained in custody. Some, like Dorcas Hoare and Elizabeth Proctor, had escaped the noose only because of the waning public appetite for executions. Elizabeth's husband, John Proctor, had not been so fortunate. Though Elizabeth was pregnant at the time of her trial and execution was stayed, John was hanged in August of the previous year. Elizabeth's release in May did not bring her peace. It brought her to a life rebuilt from ashes. In the months and years that followed, Salem and the surrounding areas began a long and painful reckoning. Ministers who had once thundered against the devil now spoke of misjudgment and sorrow. Samuel Sewall, one of the judges on the court of Oyer and Terminer, stood before his congregation in 1697 and publicly confessed his guilt. Clad in black, he fasted in penance, asking for God's forgiveness for his part in what had transpired. The same year, the Massachusetts General Court declared a day of fasting and repentance for the late tragedy. This day of official humiliation marked one of the earliest governmental admissions of moral failure in colonial American history. But not everyone was ready to let go. There were those who still whispered about witches in the woods, who believed the devil had indeed come to Salem and had merely slipped away when his work was done. And there were those, like Judge William Stoughton, who refused to admit any error. Stoughton would go on to become the acting governor of Massachusetts, never once expressing regret for the death warrants he had signed. Yet despite these divisions, the legacy of the trials began to reshape the colony's understanding of justice. Legal reforms followed. The idea of relying on invisible evidence, of valuing confession over fact, was scrutinized. Future courts were more careful. The Salem experience became a cautionary tale, a grim reminder of how fear could twist even the most devout intentions. Meanwhile, the families of the accused fought for restitution. In 1711, nearly 2 decades after the first hangings, the colony passed a bill that formally cleared the names of many of the accused and granted modest financial compensation to their descendants. The sum was small, far too little for what had been taken, but it was a start. Still, not all the names were cleared at once. It would take centuries, literal centuries, for some, like Elizabeth Johnson Jr., to be officially exonerated. Her name, among the last to be cleared, wasn't struck from the record until 2021, over 300 years after the events unfolded. As Salem aged, it did not forget. The village itself eventually changed, evolving into what is now known as Danvers, while nearby, Salem Town became the modern city that bears the infamous name. But reminders of the past endured. Gallows Hill remained a ghost in the town's memory, its exact location debated, its silence heavy. In the 19th century, the Romantic and Gothic literary movements brought renewed attention to the trials. Writers like Nathaniel Hawthorne, himself a descendant of Judge John Hathorne, wrestled with the legacy. In his works, guilt and inherited shame were never far from the surface. He even added a W to his name, becoming Hawthorne, to symbolically distance himself from his ancestors' role in the horrors of 1692. Visitors came, drawn to the mystery, the macabre, and the moral complexity of what had happened. Some came for the ghost stories, others for the history. Salem became both a place of remembrance and a symbol of mass hysteria, of injustice, and of the dangerous power of belief when untethered from reason. But beyond the tourism, beyond the reenactments and seasonal pageantry, the real lessons of Salem whisper still, soft as the wind through bare branches in November. They tell us that fear can be a powerful force, that communities, when pressed by uncertainty and the unknown, may turn inward and devour their own. That justice must be grounded in fairness, and that truth can be obscured by the shadows of desperation. The Salem witch trials were not merely the product of superstition. They were the result of a society under strain, dealing with war on its frontiers, disease, political uncertainty, and the rigid expectations of religious life. In that crucible, suspicion festered, grudges surfaced, and when the match was struck, by a child's strange behavior or a minister's anxious sermon. It caught fast and burned clean through the community. What remained, once the fires of hysteria had died down, were not witches. Only the memories of neighbors turned against neighbors, the ghosts of lost lives, and a warning passed quietly from one generation to the next. Today, when we speak of Salem, we often imagine the fantastical, broomsticks, pointed hats, spells under moonlight. But the true story is far more human and far more haunting. It is a story of frailty, of fear, of the ease with which good people can be swept into dark acts when certainty becomes more comforting than truth. In the fading light of those days, some things were made right, others never could be. The names of those hanged on Gallows Hill, Bridget Bishop, Sarah Good, Rebecca Nurse, and 16 more, stand as a solemn testament to the cost of unchecked fear. Their legacy is not in the superstition they were accused of, but in the need for critical thought, compassion, and justice, even in the face of the unknown. And so the village sleeps again, beneath modern roads and homes and history books. The snow still falls, the winds still whisper. But if you listen closely on a quiet evening, you may hear more than just the past. You may hear a caution, gentle, persistent, asking us not to forget what happened in that year of shadows. To not mistake difference for danger. To not let silence carry the weight of regret. Because Salem was not a tale of witches. It was a tale of people and what they can become when fear is allowed to rule the day.